Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Nick Slavic. I'm the proprietor of the Nick Slavic Painting and Restoration Company. I'm also the host of this program, Ask a Painter Live, on Facebook every Friday morning. It's a chance for everybody to send in your questions live or during the week or after this, and I will answer them, whether it has to do with painting, staining, varnishing, inside, outside stuff, furniture projects, any sort of finishing project that can be in or around the house. I will answer those questions live. If I use your question, I will send you a handmade Nick Slavic mug. I've been doing this for a couple weeks now. I've got a great response from it. So thank you for sending in all your questions. Today, I'm going to be discussing a few interesting things. I have a question from a homeowner about stabilizing rust on an antique tin ceiling. We have a question about removing overspray from brick, and also something very special I'll be going through with you guys today is I went through my library of historic and modern resources, and I'm going to show you some of the things that inspire me, whether it be traditional wood finishing, modern wood finishing, color inspiration, design inspiration, philosophies about color and painting and things like that. I have a whole bunch of resources here to show you. I've been collecting them for probably 20 years now. I picked a few, and I thought it might be interesting to run a few of those by. So today's question from Julie Sunsdahl, she asked, how do you stabilize the rust on a tin ceiling before painting it? I get this question every once in a while when people are doing renovations of historic Main Street businesses. A lot of times the original tin ceilings are still in the buildings. The ones that have not been painted, and even some of the ones that have rust from water damage, or if they're in a very damp environment for many, many years and haven't been taken care of, they can tend to get some surface rust. Some of them, if they have water coming from above, you won't notice until they actually rust through the panel, and then there's a lot of deterioration. There's a couple ways to do this. Number one, I would always recommend removing the rust mechanically, whether it's wire brush, grinding wheel. I would take it easy on the random orbital sanders and things like that, because you'll actually, first of all, it's going to be hard to get into some of those profiles, those intricate profiles with that. And number two, you actually be removing some metal. And I'm usually not in favor of that, only because those sheets aren't that thick. Most of them are between 100 and 140 years old, and they may be brittle, and you never know how much rust is on the backside. So it may look intact from down on the floor 20 feet below that ceiling, but a lot of times it may be real punky and it may be loose up there. So I would say mechanically remove it if you can, but that's a huge job. There is another way to go around it. There is a chemical, and many chemicals I should say, that you can actually apply to it to stabilize it and reform it. When you're looking for products like this, obviously Rust-Oleum is probably the most widespread, readily available product that you can find. You can get them at big box stores, hardware stores, and the like, the internet too. But there's a whole bunch of specialty chemicals for agricultural uses. A lot of times agricultural uses, there's rust on certain things in milk houses, on tin sheds, and this and that, and farmers and people who run those farms need a very economical, easy way to deal with this rust. A lot of times they don't want to paint it, so they just want something that reforms it, stabilizes it, and then protects it for the future. And these products are again, they're under rust stabilizers, rust reformers, rust neutralizers, things like that. The basis of these products is basically a water-based sort of milky white solution. Think of like a can of paint without much pigment in it, and you apply it by brush, you apply it by sprayer. Sprayer would obviously be the best to get the even coat and a nice thick coat. Most of them are tannic acid based. It's a very safe product. Tannic acid, think about the tannin in a tree, things that turn things darker color. Tannic acid is actually used to clarify beer and wine in the food industry. You spray it on, you brush it on. It's a water-based product, very safe. In most of the literature that I've read up on it, it's basically as safe or safer than regular latex paint. So you brush and apply this on there, and it chemically neutralizes the rust. It actually chemically changes the rust into a sort of black or deep blue stabilized version of itself, And a lot of these products in their thicker water-based form will actually then have a protective coating on there. And after that, I mean, obviously in agricultural uses, you can just leave them as is and it's got a protective coating. Most people would want to paint over this, and you can use solvent-based paints, you can use water-based paints, any kind of epoxies, this and that. So it basically just gives you a nice stable substrate to then work with. So my only caution with this, from the little experience I've had with it, is that it will neutralize the rust, but if the rust is very coarse, if it's a lot of surface rust, a lot of times when things rust, it oxidizes and then piles upon itself. So it's not just the metal that's nice and smooth that rust. It actually kind of shales and delaminates and makes it kind of rough and this and that. It will just keep it rough. So if there's a lot of surface rust, if there's a lot of roughness to it, this is not going to get rid of that. That's why I recommend the mechanical removal of the rust. Even if you do remove the rust mechanically, there's probably going to be a little surface rust left over, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to give it a protective coat of this. And like I said, you can coat it with any kind of paint, any kind of primer. I would probably, they say you can recoat it 4 to 8 hours. I would certainly wait quite a bit longer than that because it is a water-based product, that there's a chemical reaction taking place. You may want to leave it for a little bit longer. So yeah, I would say, any type of, once you mechanically remove the rust, give it a protective coating, and then paint any way you would like. So it's a very involved process, but you do it once and it should last another 100 years. So time well spent in my book. The only other caution I would say with that is a lot of the tin ceilings, and I'm talking specifically about tin ceilings, but if you want that natural metal look, some of them have been unpainted and they're the stamped steel like that. If you apply this product, it will either turn it black or it will either turn it very dark blue. Think of the bluing on the barrel of shotguns and rifles and things like that. It'll give it that sort of look. So you have to be very careful with that. It's not going to be bright, shiny new metal after you do this. It basically just chemically stabilizes the rust, gives you something stable to paint over after that. So Julie actually wrote in with another question, 2 parts to her question, and she also asked, what's the best way to get paint overspray off a coarse brick? A couple things about brick. If we're talking about brick that's 100 to 150 years old, you have to be very careful with it. A lot of times the stuff was handmade with clay dug out of the ground, at least in my neck of the woods here. A lot of times it's very soft. It's kind of fun to go from town to town and see, based on the clay deposits, based on the color of the clay and the minerals in the clay, the bricks in these old buildings and houses will actually be different. A very good way to think about it is in Lonsdale, a town not far from my home here, my great-grandfather actually built his own farmhouse out of bricks. And the bricks that he dug out of the ground after he dried them in the sun were very dark red. Think of like a barn red. You go an hour away from here to the community of New Ulm, which I restore a couple houses every year, these old nice houses. And the bricks are very, light, rusty, sort of reddish, very warm, burnt sienna kind of color. And it's universal there because of the clay is so much different from there to there. And there's a whole bunch of Main Street buildings in my hometown, New Prague here, that have a very blonde brick. And in fact, when my house and then the neighbor's house, when the neighbor's house took the chimney out, the brick was almost blondish white when they did that. So it's kind of based on where you get the clay from and how you fire it and then how you work it. But a lot of those old bricks are very soft. If you go to pressure wash them, if you use coarse chemicals, if you use a lot of other things like that, you'll actually deteriorate the brick. And actually a wire brush or a scraper or a wire wheel on a grinder will actually just dig right through the brick. You can almost cut a brick in half with a wire wheel sometimes. So you have to be very careful with what you use. Some of the bricks, 40s, 50s, 60s, they have they're skinnier bricks, and a lot of them have like a brushed face. So it's very coarse, and once you fully paint them, there's almost no way to get all the paint out of there. I mean, you would basically be at replacement cost for that. But if there's just some light overspray, what I would first try is a very stiff bristled brush. Use some simple green, use some TSP. TSP is about the strongest sort of soap that I use for general cleaning, and scrub and rinse and scrub and rinse And as long as you don't affect the brick, some of that stuff should come off. If it's heavy oil overspray, or if it's oil overspray, what you might actually have to use is a chemical stripper. Now, most people, when they think of paint stripper, they think of the methyl ethyl chloride sort of, comes in a tin can. You got to fully suit up with respirators. You got to apply it. It's a paste. It bubbles up the paint. You scrape it off. That's very caustic. And especially, with a piece of furniture, you can lay out a clean work area. And if it gets on a drop cloth, or if it gets on a piece of cardboard, it's all right. But if this is on a building, you have to be careful for painted surfaces around it. You have to be careful for landscaping, concrete, windows. I mean, anything else that surrounds this brick. So what I would try first, there's actually products called deck strippers, which are sometimes a more alkaline solution. And they're a little bit thinner. They're kind of more watery, but they're not as caustic. The downside of this is that it's not going to strip the paint off as quick, but it's something that I've used many times in the past. And actually last week when I did that log siding restoration, I actually chemically stripped one side of it while keeping the landscape and the bushes all right, and rinsing it that way. So, and these are available from any hardware store. I get mine from the Ace Hardware down the road here. They always have a couple jugs in stock. It comes in a gallon form. It's pre-mixed. You don't need to dilute it with water. You can either spray it on with a garden sprayer like I do, one of those little pump sprayers. You can spray it on with one of the backpack sprayers like they put insecticide or herbicide on lawns. Or you can just use a scrub brush or a paintbrush and apply it on there. And normally within about 15 or 20 minutes, it'll start pulling some of that stuff off. And obviously, if you're doing this, you want to do a little bit of a test patch somewhere to make sure that it doesn't do anything odd to the brick. Whenever you're dealing with masonry, you have to be careful about what chemicals you put on it. It could actually chemically react with either the mortar or the brick. So yeah, I would give that a try. Scrub with a bristle brush and then rinse off. If it's inside of a building, it's kind of another deal. You have to you have to contain all this stuff. Outside, you can wash it away, you can neutralize it. But inside, it's a whole nother deal. Try mechanical removal first. If mechanical removal either damages the brick or doesn't do a good job, you're just going to have to work in small areas with scrub brush and stripper, and just line the floor with plastic, duct tape the plastic to the wall, make yourself a little trough so it collects all the chemicals, and safety gear up. Get the good gloves on, get the coveralls on, and respirator, a hood, all that other stuff just to be safe. So. Yeah, Julie, thank you for your questions. I will be sending you one of these handmade Nick Slavic mugs. Thanks again, and anybody who sends in a question and I use it, I will send you one of those as well. I will now go through. I selected a few things from my library of resources. A lot of them are historic resources. Some of them are newer stuff, but I get a lot of inspiration for when I help clients with colors, when I do inspiration, and when I decorate my own home, especially the traditional wood finishing side of my business. I love to read about old ways of finishing, and because nowadays almost nobody has experience with oil varnish, let alone even shellacs and japans and things like that came before that. So, having said that, I'll run you through a few resources here. One of the interesting ones here, this is put out by the New Prague newspaper. This is my hometown here, and this is from the late 1800s, I believe. They put together a list of some historic resources from the town, and this was reprinted a few years ago. And one of the neat things that I found in this, 10, 15 years ago, is this is actually an ad for 3 local painters, wallpapers, and calcimimers in New Prague. And 10 years ago, when I started my own business, I needed logos, I needed branding, I needed all this other stuff, and I took a lot of inspiration from these late 1800 newspaper articles and things like that. So between, the ads were obviously very simple, but the fonts they used, the way they worded their ads, this is something that I use for my own business. This one here, this is a late 1800s, the decorators and renovators assistant. Somebody actually gave this to me. They know I collect these old resources, and this is another one of those sort of treatises on color, on pigment, how to mix things, how to do some renovation, even how to plant plants around your house in order to get rid of musty smells in these old homes that didn't have fans and this and that. One of the interesting things, there's a lot I love the language in these old resources, but one paragraph here, when reading through this years ago, I found that was interesting is painters and all engaged in painting should pay the strictest attention to cleanliness, avoid spirits, avoid daubing the hands with paint, never eat or go to rest without washing their hands or face. And the second part where they talk about avoid spirits, it's not mineral spirits, it's actually alcohol. So even in the 1800s, people were warning against things like that. They knew painters had kind of a predilection to that sort of thing. Another great resource here, and this is for any design person, this is a reprint of an 1878 book written by Charles Eastlake. The Eastlake name would probably be familiar to you guys. They actually have a design style from the late 1800s named after Charles Eastlake, the Eastlake style. It's a very intricate style, very interesting style. But yeah, he basically gives, it's a whole book on his opinions about decorating, and he has some very forceful opinions, and many of them are still around today. One of them is actually a great quote that my wife and I had both cut out of separate magazines and kept. It's have nothing in your home that's not beautiful or useful. You know, a simplified version of that, and I love that quote always, and I try to follow it. But yeah, in this book, he's a furniture designer, interior designer. He goes through wallpaper, plaster molding, decoration, style, anything. This is a little more esoteric, but it's a very good kind of overall theory on design. Now, some wood finishing things that I collect here, because I like to keep myself up on those historic resources. Gustav Stickley, one of the most famous arts and crafts furniture manufacturers in the world. This is a research project by Michael McCracken, and this is the most encompassing work that I've ever read on this sort of arts and crafts and craftsman furniture. One of the most useful resources that I've seen is he actually collects samples of the original finish, tells you what goes in them and how to do them. So he shows like a piece of furniture which its original finish intact, and then he tells you the formula for that finish. And a lot of these, and again, I should say that as a lover of history and a lover of design and color and houses, a lot of the things that we see now in the most modern houses are not new. As a matter of fact, what's happening now is basically a recycling of what happened from about 1905 to 1925, at least in my neck of the woods here, as far as color, design, style of houses, shapes of houses, things like that. So, but this is another great reference here, and for somebody who loves the traditional wood finishes, it catalogs them, and this is actually this is research based and a great resource for furniture finishers. A lot of odd little things that I find, woodwork for secondary schools. My wife and I go to antique stores all the time, and you'll find these all over the place. A lot of times they're a quarter a piece. And in there, not only do they outline traditional ways of making furniture, they also tell you how to finish them. How to get on this page, there's actually how to get a dull finish, how to get a polish finish, how to do a gloss finish, what to rub it with to get those, painting furniture, things like that. This is a resource from 1916 that I find. This is actually a pretty cool one here. This is a 1907 book, and this is 1,000 or 1,200 pages, all about everything that I consider myself a decorator. So basically, when somebody calls me into their house, I want to help them in any way I can. Wallpaper, decorative finish, inside, outside, woodwork, flooring, this and that, as far as the finishes of all that. And this is basically the treatise on in the late 1800s. When you call a decorator could do anything. He could enamel furniture, he could gold leaf, he could paint the outside of the house, he could do anything you need to beautify the house. And this from the late 1800s is exactly that. And as a matter of fact, this is a page that I really thought was cool. This is an antique wallpaper hangers table, and I actually have one of these downstairs. That ad that I showed you from the New Prague paper from the late 1800s, one of those painters had given it to my father, and my father had given it to me. So I actually have one of those guys' antique wallpaper cutting tables there. So again, it's the language in these is very flowery. You got to get through to the good stuff, but a lot of them have the old traditional sort of formulas for these finishes. give or take 1980, wood finishing by Vanderwalker. This is one of the 2 or 3 Bibles of wood finishing that most people refer to. They even tell you how to paint, how to stain, how to do different things, formulas for that. A lot of talk on color and pigments, things like that. So again, super down in the weeds, super nerdy stuff, but when you have to get the answers to these questions, there's almost nobody around that knows this stuff, so you got to go to the books. Okay, as far as color, color is something I try to keep as many resources as I can on. This is a binder I keep on certain decorative finishes, paint, stuff like that. Whenever I find old paint ads, I cut them out, I save them, and then when somebody with a historic home says I want something very historically accurate, I go back to these guys and I say, well, actually, this is from 1923. Your house was built in 21, 22, 24 or something. These are the actually colors that were ready mixed, available, and shippable at that time. So if you want ultra traditional, one of these is going to be it. Now, most people have their interpretations of what is actually, they have an idea of what is traditional. A lot of times the colors are a little different than that, but at least I have resources to show people and to prove historically, without a doubt, that this is what was available to your house at the time. Another resource, and I have many of these. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, you could actually mail order a home, and Sears was a big company. You could actually order a house through Sears. It would come cut and with instructions, and you would just put it up. Aladdin was another big company, and these are very unique resources because they would actually send out catalogs to lumber yards, to places that people in these small towns would get. You could order up a home. Now, the benefit of these is that here's a reprinted one from Sears. This is 1913, but it actually shows you in here, if you can see this, this is what a bathroom, state-of-the-art bathroom in 1913 would look like, with all the fixtures, wood tank on the toilet, how a bedroom would be set up. So when people ask me for design advice, or what kind of style of door I should get for my house, vanities, things like that, I mean, this is basically in 1913. If you wanted to order something and you were in a rural part of America from Sears, this actual bathroom could show up at your door. So I take a lot of inspiration from things like that, and you can see, based on rugs, window fashions, things like that, how people used to decorate houses like that. And here, speaking of Sears, this is an actual reprint. What year is this one here? This is 1902. In 1902, this is the Sears catalog. This is basically a time capsule. I mean, it has everything from clothes. Here's an antique stove here. But the things that I find very interesting are the home resources. Here is their section on wallpaper. And it'll actually show you different patterns of wallpaper and how they used them. You can see here borders, ceiling papers, wallpapers. But this is a very interesting time capsule. Again, in 1902, give or take, this is what was available to you, especially if you didn't live in a big metropolitan area. So again, a great resource, a complete time capsule, everything from windmills, farm machinery. It's amazing what you'll find in some of those things there. Some color resources here too, a reprint of a previously done work on this. This is a collection of 1820 to 1920 color. Pull one example out from here. These are actual colored lithographs from these companies that would sell houses, and this would actually show you what the houses would have been painted like back then. So this is a great resource that I found. One of the most interesting things that I found over the years is that people 100 years ago used roofs as an accent color much more than they do today. Everything today is either brown, or it's gray, or it's taupe, or it's some mixture of the both. What you'll see in a lot of these is a lot of green, a lot of red roofs along with that. I think the paint colors available to a lot of people very early in the 20th century were limited, so what they would do is get colored shingles, and that's something that I wish people would bring back a little bit more, but it's sort of a more permanent color choice, so I can understand why people don't do it. Same thing here, 1883 collection of Victorian colors. You can see how the colors kind of change over the years. These are hand-colored images where in 1883, if you wanted to paint your house, this was sort of cutting edge sort of colors like this, very deep earth tones, ochres, and things like that. Another one here, this is a collection of Sears homes, and I'll show you what I mean by some interior spaces here. A lot of times they will actually give you floor plans, and they will actually show you how they would lay out the interior of these new houses. So a lot of these houses, these Sears homes, you can actually still find around, and we have some in our town here, but you'll look at the forms of them and they'll be very familiar, and there's actually hundreds of thousands of these homes around, and you can actually go in there, the floor plan would be the same, things like that. So churches are a great resource for me. Normally they remain unchanged or minimally changed, and they're kept up very well because it's a committee of people, and there's history, and there's a lot of family traditions in there, and people tend to keep them up well. So here's a book on Minnesota churches, inside and outside, and I use this as a resource as well. A lot of the woodwork in these churches is especially interesting to me because it has a lot of its original finish on it yet. Never really was there the trend to paint woodwork in churches. So what you'll find is a lot of the original woodwork polished, lemon oiled, waxed over the years, and intact. So it's actually a good resource if you're interested in that sort of thing. Here's the other company I was talking about, Aladdin. They're another mail order catalog there. Same thing here. This will actually show you the furniture, how to lay it out in the house, floor plans, and that extremely happy looking couple out in front of their gambrel roofed house. And I mean, it's such a novelty, $645, you can get a house delivered to yourself. But another great resource here. For anybody who's a nerd like I am about this stuff, Paint in America, these are a collection of research projects done about the history of paint. And if you really want to get in the weeds, this is the place to do it. Very technical work. These are actually cuttings of historic paint, and it shows you the layers of paint over the years, and they actually use imaging microscopes and things like that to do that. And they'll actually take shavings, they'll figure out the pigments, the bases of them, and they recreate these paints and then use them on historic structures. I believe there was even an article in here about the White House and how they dug through that and found all the historic colors. Another unique resource, Edward Hopper is one of my favorite artists, and he does some really interesting paintings of homes. And what I find is interesting is that 1934, 1912, give or take, he actually painted these images of these homes. So this would tell you, between 1912 and 1934, this is a lot of the colors that people were using, at least at his time. If these homes were built in the late 1800s or early 1900s, this probably would have been their second or third coat of paint at that time, and you could tell how the trends were changing and good. I just thought it was a unique resource. And finally, if you can go to the source material, this is an actual home catalog that would have been delivered to a lumber yard. This is from 1922, 1923. This is a surviving document, the original one. So if you lived in a rural area, 1922, 1923, you would go down to your lumber yard or your purveyor of lumber, and this is the actual catalog you would get to look at your house. These are all hand-colored images, frames like that, and you can tell in this one, this is what I was talking about with the accent colors on the roofs and things like that. So these are very, very interesting documents here, almost 100 years old now. And these are sort of, if you want to go to the source for color for your house, find some of these. And a lot of these are free through Google Books. If you go online, they're cataloged on there, and you can go through there. But it is nice to have one in your hand. So thank you guys for tuning in here. I appreciate all the questions that everybody's been sending. Send me your questions. Like I said, if I do use it, I will send you one of my handmade mugs. Wondering if there's anything else. I think that's it for the week. I appreciate all you guys for tuning into this. There's a button on here where you can get automatic notifications when I'm live. It's a follow button. And if you like this and you think somebody else would too, share it. And again, I appreciate all your questions. Send them to me during the week. During this broadcast, and I'd be happy to answer any of those. I'll just scroll through to see if we have any questions here. We got a question. Good morning, Nick. Been having a lot of rain and high heat in summer, so exterior painting and staining has been almost impossible. Any ideas on things to say to customers so they understand it's not a good idea to work in these conditions? Oh yeah, Anthony, thank you for that. Yeah, you know, for me, it's always been kind of self-explanatory. If it's high heat or if it's raining, most people understand that you can't paint in that. A lot of the times, people actually ask me, you know, when it gets up into the 90s, you know, is the paint dry too fast or is it bad for the paint? No, it meets the specs of the paint if you look at the technical data sheet. So a lot of times they're more asking cautionary questions as to, are you sure you can paint during this? Are you sure you can paint during that? And vice versa. It sounds like you might be dealing with people pushing you a little bit. But no, I guess I haven't really run into that. But certainly, I mean, if you're like this week here too, I believe this is our 4th day of rain and mist here in New Prague. So it's pretty self-explanatory, you know, when I'm a couple days behind schedule at this point. So I hope it helps, and I hope you have a better luck with some of your homeowners and stuff there too. So again, thanks everybody for following. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And like I said, if you think somebody else would like this stuff or have some use from it, just share it, and we'll see you guys next week.